fluid and open discussion. Everybody has an equal say. However, we do have a few discussants who will sort of lead the discussion. And what we are doing is going to pose a few questions which were in the description for this session. So to do that, I'm going to start with an introduction of today's session and then pose one or two questions to our discussants who are not currently prepped to answer, but they would fall in as accordingly, and then we'll ask you as participants in the roundtable to fall in as well and discuss. So one of the first things I wanted to say is that last year's roundtable was called Death, Disaster and the Internet, if you recall. And unfortunately, we seem to be very predictive because quite literally after that roundtable, we had several Caribbean islands in particular and also some Pacific islands being affected by natural disasters, which leads us to this year's roundtable, which is a follow-up about resources. So the question is a very interesting one because one of the things that we ask in our countries is where are our resources that are designed to help us participate in the internet economy. For many of us in small island states, many of our resources are trained and educated there, but we lose them. When I say resources, I mean human resources in this scenario. So they go to the US or Europe and they don't return. So we've educated them, whether they're educated in country or out of country, but they don't return. And our resources to do our work in participating in that economy is challenged. And on the flip side of that, in terms of the digital economy and the issues of bandwidth, some of our operators and ISPs have, and I know Maureen Hilyard will want to weigh in heavily on this, have been very challenged providing the necessary bandwidth and resources at an affordable price for us to actually do what we need to do to participate in the economy. So the question is a very controversial one. Are we running out of resources? Is that a real question? Or is it that the way we are structured as small island developing states don't allow us to truly effectively optimize what we have in our countries as native people living there? We are unable to import resources if that's what's required in some cases. And I would like to refer here to a report that was done by the Internet Society actually. And we have Jane Coffin, who is one of the architects of that report, one of the lead scribes. And she would also provide some insight as to what they found across the board from their study of several small and developing states. So that's a sort of a kind of a brief introduction to the topic. It's really very open. I hope it's clear to all. And what I would want to do, as I said before, it's open to all to discuss. But I first want to ask one of our discussants to respond to that opening. Maybe I could, because of I'm a Caribbean person, I would ask my Pacific colleague, either Maureen or Anju, who I saw join us, to maybe respond, or maybe even Sala to give us a countervailing point from the Pacific Island or even an alignment point. So it's up to you. As I said, it's open, and let's see who wants to go first from the Pacific. Perhaps Maureen might want to go first. Maureen Hilyard.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Actually, I think it'd be really great if we had a summary of the report. It might give us a sort of like a general, a general introduction for everyone to be able to sort of like make some contribution.
So
Jane, is that okay for you?
I lean to my Pacific colleague who has advised accordingly. So I would ask my colleague from Internet Society, who is specially here to present that report actually, to perhaps, Jane, are you ready to present that report?
Jane, the microphone. Jane, the mic.
No, she's not talking yet. Yeah. So while we have some, maybe some silence, all right, there we go. Jane's ready. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. I know, wow, there are a lot of people here. Sorry. the Internet Society, I think many of you know who we are focused very much on landlocked developing countries and small island developing states. It's something you'll see in most United Nations organizations as well as a keen focus because of the specific nature of SIDS and LLDCs, landlocked developing countries. But specifically with SIDS, we have great chapters, great colleagues who live in these communities, and our Vice President, Raul Echevarria, was very keen to make sure that we were focused on SIDS this year and next year, particularly going into large development conferences and meetings like this, so there could be an extra focus. I would say from a global community's perspective, you have a collective action you can take as a community of interest. As Tracy, if you're saying, are resources running away? I don't think so, but there are ways that you can leverage those resources better. And one aspect of that is when large development organizations and banks give loans, it costs them as much to do a $1 loan as it would a $10 million from a resource perspective, human resource perspective, inside their organizations. So if you're all looking at competing for grants and money, there may be a collective way to do this. And it's just a suggestion from me from discussions I've had over the last couple of days with people. But the key thing that we did was we took a look from a cross-section of SIDS from around the world, whether it was from Africa, the Pacific, or the Caribbean. We had a peer review with both individuals living in those economies, consultants from the World Bank, A4AI, I don't know if you know the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and other similar institutions. The importance of having a peer review was to take input from people who are doing different economic studies, different communication studies, and to take a look at the benefit that the internet can bring. I think it's no longer an assumption, and we know this years ago when I used to do communications work in developing countries, landlocked countries. I used to have to fight to prove to the World Bank and others that communications led to economic development. Now the World Bank will show you fabulous reports, and they've done all this great research, as has the ITU. ISOC is trying to contribute to this in a small way, specifically with a focus on what internet connectivity can do. But now we no longer have to prove that communications and internet connectivity leads to economic and social development and growth. It's a fact, yeah? So it's a good baseline that we know if economic development relies on connectivity, I would posit, why aren't we trying to connect each other more? And as government officials, if there are any in the room, obviously you know that by the well-being of your country, and it's a good political thing to do, is to connect your people. So with SIDS, you obviously have distance, small populations on your islands, right? If you look at Vanuatu, many, many islands in Vanuatu. And Sala, who's from Fiji, knows, Tracy, who's from Trinidad, you've got different islands that have different resources. Some will have mining, some might have oil and gas, others are agriculturally dependent, obviously fishing, tourism. You can harness all of those different economic sectors by having better connectivity. I think that's just an easy, logical step to make. But what is it that's holding us back? So some of the different findings in the report were those different factors. Was it the fact that you had a monopoly or a duopoly and an incumbent that made it difficult for competition? And what I mean by that is, how easy is it from a regulatory or policy perspective to allow in competition small companies providing services? And if it's not easy and it's not economically viable, then how is it that low-cost access is being provided? Are there internet exchange points? This was a factor we looked across the islands themselves to see who had internet exchange points and not. When you have an internet exchange point, the cost of connectivity is lower on your island. If you don't have an IXP, you're literally sending traffic outside the island to come back, which is called long-haul traffic, very expensive. So Bevil Wooding, who's here as well, who's also from Trinidad, Bevil has probably put in more internet exchange points in the Caribbean than anyone. I think he's sort of the father of most of those IXPs. He's here. You have to come talk to him. He's an amazing person. We just come in behind and say, is there anything we can help you do? But Bevil has done it and also helped with different technological capacity building. So there are key factors for development in countries, both from the economic and social side. You need a strong technical community of people, humans, right, to be able to run those networks. If you don't have those resources, talk to people like Bevil and me. We know people who are doing training. Internet exchange points are a key factor for bringing down cost. The round trip, if you will, out and back for a packet, the internet packet that's swimming, right? You don't want them swimming. You might want them running across the land in the country, right? So if you have an IXP, talk to Bevil. He can explain some of those dynamics better. We do this work in other countries as well. But IXPs are critical. Obviously, submarine cables to your countries. Those are expensive, yes? And from a regulatory perspective, when the submarine cable lands on the beach or the rocks in your country, how is that traffic being pulled back into the country? This is called backhaul. If you don't liberalize the backhaul from the submarine cable landing station, the traffic is very expensive to move into your country. There's a huge regulatory and policy issue here with connectivity that needs to be explored. So I guess much of the conversation here also is, where is the multi-stakeholder model working in your countries where you have access to politicians, people who are technologists, and can talk to each other to try and create a better enabling environment across the board. So the report's looking at different factors from IXP development, submarine cable access, the cost of connectivity, and what those different communications infrastructures can help enable, whether it's ag, tourism, government resources, education, health, financial inclusion, and disaster relief. One thing I'll leave you with is that, and I'm not sure if there's anyone here from Vanuatu. Is there anyone here from Vanuatu? They're coming this week. There's a great story about a community network, which is a bottom-up wireless sort of Wi-Fi mesh network that was developed on one of the islands. Yes. A young woman named Alexis, who was a Peace Corps volunteer with her husband, was living on this island. There was very little health services that were available, and they were trying to promote e-health. So they ended up doing a bottom-up network, which is what we call the community networks. They bought a tower. They had to go through a lot of regulatory and policy discussions to get the tower up on the island. The funny thing about that tower is that it allowed the nurse who was in the village to be able to provide more services, but to communicate with others in the community, so she felt like she wasn't alone in that community. To get a universal service funding grant, it took a year because they had the regulation in place, but they didn't have all the rules, procedures, and processes established. So if you work in a government ministry and you've got a universal service fund, you've got to figure out a way to help make it walk. These are one of the things that we keep seeing around the world. You have this funding potentially that you've collected from the taxes that you're pushing out you're collecting from the carriers, but you're not pushing it back into your community. I'd say this is a great place for civil society, for different companies to come together to try and figure out how you can create bottom-up connectivity in your different places. There's a great session tomorrow at 17:20. It's the Dynamic Coalition for Community Connectivity with Luca Belli. Luca and many experts from around the world are there to tell you about community networks that have been built. One of the factors in the report that we found, obviously, is that education is important. I think literacy was just mentioned in the last panel. So the question is, what is that nexus between literacy, connectivity, economic development, and more? The report's online, available to all of you. I think I probably said enough, but the question is, what type of connectivity do you have? How do you improve it? What are those challenges? And how do you unlock those challenges? So the internet, we know, can be a great enabler, but how is it that you can help free it up in your country? And access isn't just the fiber coming into the country, it's also how affordable that access is. So it's bringing down those price points with different connectivity options. I'll stop there because there's lots more you need to discuss. So,
Thank you, Jane. And perhaps you could let us know that where the report is available and
yes,
and
well,
so on.
we have a new website, which the search engine is kind of complicated. So I'll send it around to Tracy so that, does everyone here, we're not connected in a group. It's on our website, so you should search for SIDS on the ISOC website in our search engine. And the report's title, hang on, is ensuring sustainable connectivity in small island developing states. So if you search for SIDS in 2017, you'll find it. And Mike Jensen, who's a great colleague of ours from lots of different work, has helped co-write the report. So Mike's here, he just walked in. But again, it's called the Ensuring Sustainable Connectivity in Small Island Developing States. It was released, I believe, in June this year, but we were working on it for most of the year. So thank you. Yep.
Thanks, Jane. And I do notice that the scribes are having a difficult time hearing the audio. I'm seeing a lot of too low to hear, so perhaps, I don't know if there's anything on the technical side that can be done to assist in that regard. And also for the record, the stream is still not being broadcast on the right channel, so this event is not being broadcast live as it should be. So I'll just put that down for the record, and can someone please assist with ensuring that this is streamed? We have people in other countries waiting to see what's happening, and they're watching another room according to the channel. So please assist. Thank you. I hope so. Yeah. But we're not getting the live stream. Yeah. So given that we've had the ISOC intervention, maybe I could re-toss to the Pacific side of this, and I don't know if it'll be Sala or Anju to talk about the points that I had raised, but I'm watching the banter to see who's going to do it, and it looks like it might be Sala.
Good morning, everyone. I bring greetings from the Pacific, particularly from Fiji and the people of Vanuatu, because I was recently there 4 days ago. So the regulator's office, they say hi. They're hosting the Asia Pacific IGF. They can't wait for some of you to attend. So we warmly welcome all of you when you do visit our shores. Thank you, Maureen, for passing the buck. Now, in relation to the topic that Tracy had sort of designed, are we running out of resources? I can say I'll speak to certain circumstances, certain contexts only. And so, but first let me make it clear that these comments are made in my personal capacity and not made, and not from any of my affiliations. So I used to work for the Regional University of the South Pacific a few years ago, I think about 2 years ago. And it's one of 2 regional universities in the world. I think the University of West Indies and the University of the South Pacific. So in the world, there are only 2 regional universities. And it just so happens that as we were doing the planning and design for infrastructure in terms of what capacity needs we'd be needing for the future, one of the things we quickly found out that you can't plan for the current usage back then. And so what we had to do was look into the future and sort of forecast demands based on a mathematical model where we looked at several past years in terms of how content was driving usage. And what we found clearly shocked us, because it can't be explained logically. I mean, like, you can assume that one person in a university could use, like, say, 5 devices, for instance, to be on the net. But in terms of demand and content, in terms of demand and the pull on the university's network, and just to give a bit more context, the USP net, which is a University of the South Pacific net, actually houses a lot of the regional organizations' information repositories, including some of the climate change databases, the Pacific Islands Regional University network, also I'm not sure if you've heard of RENS, Research Education Networks. So in the Pacific, in Oceania, you only have Australia that has a research education network, New Zealand, and so the Pacific Research Education Network actually is housed on the USP infrastructure backbone. So in terms of resources, and there's so many more which I won't go into, there's about 10 or 11 completely complex information repositories that the region and regional organizations depend on. So based on those infrastructure pools, Tracy's question is actually a valid one, and there are serious resource constraints. And just alluding to, connecting it to Jane's report, and one of the major challenges is the liberalization of the backhaul. So not every country and territory in the Pacific region, and by the way, the Pacific, or Oceania, is made up of 27 countries and territories that are signed with country code top-level domains. And so the SIDS, the definition of SIDS are countries that actually vote in the UN. So we don't want to exclude the 27 countries and territories. And it has been said that the most expensive internet accessibility and affordability is actually from this part of the world in the Pacific. And a predominant issue is because we have the world's largest collectively exclusive economic zone. You might have heard of a small country, a small state called Kiribati. Last year we had a representative from the ISOC young ambassador, Kenan, who's not here, but I'm sure he's streaming in. And he spoke very eloquently about the plight of Kiribati. And so even in Kiribati, like, they have serious resource constraints. So you've got countries like Solomon Islands, where the average person finds it very difficult to access the internet, even in an internet cafe, because the cost of chicken is like, what, $80? So it's easier for them to buy a can of tuna. So, I mean, I'm just sort of, that's 80 Solomon dollars. So, you know, you've got issues like gross national income per capita, economic issues in context. So these are some sorts of challenges, the economic challenges that relate to accessibility. Now, in the country that I was just recently in, a few days ago, Vanuatu, that hosted the Pacific Internet Governance Forum this year, internet access earlier this year, June, was horrible and shocking. I mean, in terms of the cost. I literally spent, what, about $300 on 2 gigs, which is crazy, right? It's just crazy. But, and one of the reasons for that is the competition infrastructure landscape. You had one of the operators that had a monopoly. And so the telcos on the second tier obviously were impacted, and they obviously wouldn't bear the cost. And as always, cost gets passed down to consumers. And a lot of this is same for a lot of the other small island states in the region. So one of the things that happened was the Youth IGF, they gave up some recommendations which were already aligned to what how the regulator was already thinking. And the regulator actually slapped a price cap on the provider that had the monopoly. And it actually, so when I went back this time around, I was happy to find that internet access was much cheaper compared to the $300 that I paid last time, which for crap internet. But unfortunately, one of the things that happened was the regulator got suspended. So there are political issues involved. So in the Pacific, you have a lot of politicization too of the regulatory process. So, but I think I'll stop there and let Maureen and Anju share some of their thoughts.
Yeah, so perhaps what we could do now is, given that we just did an introduction and we had some feedback from both Caribbean and Pacific, I would imagine, because I introduced, let's open it up to the room, to the round table. Any thoughts on specifically the issues related to resource utilization in countries like ourselves, like developing countries, small developing states in particular, and how best we can improve that resource utilization, resource capture? As you heard from Sala, the Youth IGF in the Pacific provides some recommendations. So maybe it's an opportunity for the many Youth IGF fellows in this room to provide some recommendations to how we as small and developing states can better utilize our resources. Many of you are in school, many of you are graduating or just recently graduated in universities elsewhere in the world and maybe considering going back home or not. And those are the kind of things that we wanted to ask. What do you think about these issues, and how best can you help home countries in terms of participating more effectively in the internet economy. So perhaps it's a round table, so feel free to jump in. I'm seeing not a youth at IGF fellow, but certainly a round table member who wants to jump in. Feel free, yes. Name for the record for the scribes.
Yeah. My name is Abubakar Karsan. I'm from Tanzania. It's quite very far from your countries. But why I have decided to sit here is because in our part, we have what we call ACP Press Club, African, Caribbean, and Pacific Countries Press Club. It is the union of the journalists around Africa, Pacific, and Caribbean. It is a great resource which I'm sure if you can utilize it properly, there is a greater possibility on improving the resource mobilization, how we can mobilize resources, how we can utilize internet and various resources that are around the world that we can utilize in our three continents, that is Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific. If you can visit the website of ACP Press Club Countries, which is of course based on Kigali, Rwanda, but it is under the support of European Union, there is a greater possibilities that you will maybe see some of your friends, some of your colleagues who are member of that ACP Press Club. We really look the same because we are coming from developing countries and we have the same problem, the same challenges, and we might have the same approach to solving this problem, although but not exactly the same, how we can use the various options we have. So I feel very much happy and privileged today to sit among you and have such a time to talk with people who we come from the same global network. Thank you so much.
All right, so is there anything else from the floor? That, sure, go ahead.
One thing I didn't mention, and I'll speak slowly for the scribes. Yesterday, I was supposed to help Zala out and talk about the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, and some of their resources. The ITU pays specific attention, and I don't know if the ITU rep is here. They're working on reports about the topic of SIDS and LLDCs. All of their resolutions related to development make a specific reference to SIDS and LLDCs. If you're from a small island developing state and you go to these big meetings, or if you have a representative from your region, often the Caribbean will send one country to represent the Caribbean in order to maximize their resources at an ITU meeting. There is specific focus paid on the SIDS themselves in order to try and maximize resources. So find your ITU people that go and try and encourage them to make special references, get special concessions into these resolutions so that you can bring them home. I don't know how effective they are on the ground, but I think it would be useful to talk to the ITU about funding that they have for SIDS. You can also talk to, we have PIC ISOC. Maureen is with the chapter, our chapter from the Pacific. We have grants. They're small grants, but they can help you get started on internet exchange points and community networks. And now to Tracy's point, and I'll leave it to all of you for this discussion because it'd be very interesting to us as well, how do you maximize looking for resources, going after them? Do you do it together? Do you tell each other, here's a resource page, everybody, come to this page? We know that the World Bank or the Global Information Fund or Innovation Fund has money. You know, do you want to skip the big banks? Do you want to go to companies? Do you want to talk to Google and Facebook or Baidu, Xiaomi or whomever, Alibaba? Some of these organizations are putting foundations together, and also the Gates Foundation, others. So I don't want to just speak about American things. I've lived in a lot of countries, even though I have an American voice. But there are ways you can do this together. Do you want to start a SIDS resources page? So I'm going to stop talking, but are there ways that you can maximize things together, whether it's through journalism, collectiveness, talking about the small island developing states and the projects that have been done? Maybe that's something they could work with you on, Abu Bakr, is more information about the IXPs and the people who've done it, because you are the local champions. You're the local heroes on this. And we talk about this. It does take local, training each other, talking to each other. So do you have this network of people?
Thank you, Jane. And so I have an actual question I want to ask for the discussants. Bevil has been wanting to take the floor, so what I will do, I will pose the question and ask Bevil to lead it, but if he can kind of pull some of the strands that came up before into the question, which will be very relevant. So the question is, as the internet continues growing and consumption patterns increase globally, will there come a point when the resources available in small and developing states be unable to support the needs of its users? Bevil.
Well, I'll answer that question, Tracy. Bevil Wooding. I work and represent a number of Caribbean territories in the areas of internet development, and I have been, over the last few years, able to see in the trenches some of the very real issues that, that affect the advance and the development and the deployment of internet technologies in developing states. And my response to that question, Tracy, would be, if things continue the way they are, yes, we would be in a serious resource challenge as it relates to the expansion and the deployment and accessibility of the internet and the technologies and economic activity that gets built on top of it. But there's a bright side to it, which is if we are careful and if we are deliberate, we can actually ensure that our territories have the requisite amount of internet capacity. And that's where things get very interesting. And I want to draw on the last comment from Abu Bakr about the role of the media. One of the most significant challenges being faced right now is just awareness of how things relate. Jane made reference to internet exchange points and the critical role they play in establishing any type of internet growth and internet development. But for many people, there are real questions over what is an IX, why is it worth setting up, how is it function, what makes it grow. And these questions are not easily answered. And they're certainly not easily answered when the only persons in the room are technical persons. So what we have seen are cases where people are trying to establish internet exchange points, but they only invite internet service providers. In economies and in environments where there are duopolies or less than mature competitive landscapes, having only ISPs talking about internet exchange points is actually not going to yield the benefits or the promise of internet exchange points. And we've seen that in very real terms and very painful terms where incumbent operators and their equivalents would get together, establish an exchange point, and keep everyone else out. Or suppress the sharing, or not allow for content to be developed locally and only concern themselves with international content. And when you think about the issue of what does it mean to have the resources that allow for the internet to flourish in any territory, you start to recognize that it's a combination of the technical component, the regulatory environment, the entrepreneurial environment, the education environment. There are a set of people and a set of groups that will not necessarily see themselves as collaborators in the process, who, if they are not aware of what one is doing and how and when it needs to connect to what they would like to do, you just won't get the results. So what we've started building around this multi-stakeholder dialogue in terms of the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum are a set of national internet governance fora where these topics can become even more hyper-local, and where conversations around what is network resilience, what are the benefits of not just the internet exchange point, but caching servers and local content and autonomous networks Those conversations really shape the foundation for the internet economy, but those are not conversations that are commonly had, one. And two, they're not conversations that the media will easily take up and put as a headline. There is no bleeding, there is no murder, there is no scandal or sensation to internet infrastructure. And so we recognize that we have to engage the media in a new kind of education track to allow them to understand what some of these issues are and how they impact national and economic and social development. And that's a process. So some big points that we're currently working on that I will share with the room. One, an emphasis on critical internet infrastructure and the various components of it, including encouraging organizations that might not normally see themselves as requiring their own number resources and their own autonomous networks to start to think about those things. We have been working in the region through the Caribbean Network Operators Group, CARIBNOG, to engage there are two RIRs in the Caribbean, LACNIC and ARIN. And we're working with both of them to ensure that people understand what these organizations do and how to get resources from them. And the reason that has been important is because the incumbent operators tell their clients that we will be the ones to give you numbering resources, and we'll give you 2, maybe 5 if you're nice, versus getting 200 or 1,000 directly from the RIR. And we have found that people just don't know that the RIRs are there to help them build out their part of the local network to connect to the global network. So those kinds of collaborations become very important for groups like the NOGs, the Network Operators Groups, but also for groups like the Internet Society, who are set up to champion the other end of that spectrum, which is the content creation, the policy stimulation, the watchdogging function, the research and the analysis, that all together helps to create a more informed picture of what internet development ought to look like at a local level.
Thank you, Bevil. And again, as I said, this is a discussant approach, so Bevil has thrown out a few ideas and some points in response to the question. What I would like to do now is ask perhaps if there are any further points from the room, from the Pacific side, and if not, I would then have the, yes, just say your name and for the scribes and who you, and what's your point.
Okay, my name is Bridipta. I'm coming from Indonesia. I come here with the Internet Society fellow. I would like to highlight on the competition point because I remember that this is also the case with Indonesia before 1999 because we were having this monopolistic and authoritarian government where the telecommunication was not developed. It was very difficult to even access, to even get access to SIM card telephone was very difficult. But it was since the economic recession at 1999, the IMF promised to give some financial aid, but with the return of deregulation, demonopolization of the economy, and since ever that, Indonesia witnessed rapid growth of telecommunication industries alongside the internet. So maybe this is also reflected in the condition of Pacific states in the sense that maybe there is the need of I don't know, maybe a promise or an aid in return of demonopolization, some increase of regulation and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Just can you switch off that mic there? The one is not yours. Yeah. Great. So I'm seeing, how many hands am I seeing on that side? Good. So 2 on this side. So go ahead, introduce yourself and your point.
How does this work? It's on. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Gonala Astbrink from Australia, but I have done a fair bit of work in the Pacific. And I have worked with the Pacific Disability Forum, who has surveyed people with disabilities in different countries, in Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Cook Islands, and Marshall Islands.
about how people with disabilities use the internet, mobile phones, and if they don't use it, why they don't use it. And it's startling, the number of people. Well, it's not really startling. We thought there would be low usage, and there is. And that is for a number of reasons. A lot of it has to do with affordability, lack of education, cultural issues. And we heard before about universal service funds. And certainly universal service funds could be a great avenue for providing discounted services when it comes to people with disability in accessing not only the mobile phone itself, but also the cost of using it on a monthly basis. In a lot of cases, people might get a mobile phone as a gift from their relatives living, say, in New Zealand or in the US or other places. But to actually use it is very expensive. So I'm just thinking of universal service funds and how they can be used in a broader sense, and making the best use of that resource and working together to find the best ways of developing guidelines so that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's a very interesting point about unlocking, I think, the resources that are available not only within the USFs, but also within the people. So we talk about running out of resources, human resources, but there's an opportunity, I think, to look at those who are not also, or you haven't looked at before. People, persons with disabilities are people you would not normally associate with the digital economy because for whatever discriminatory reasons or prejudice that happens. So there's an opportunity, I think, today, given that small developing states are in fact running out of resources, to look inward and see if those skills that are currently locked, if you want to use that word, within PWDs, if there's a way to bring that to the fore, to ensure that those resources, those skills, if they're already there or if they can be skilled up, to bring them to the table and to have them contribute to the economies and to make them, bring them fully to the surface. And I think that's an interesting point. And that affects other things as well. Women and girls, the session before we talked about that. We talk about youth, obviously. That's the first point. And also issues related to people who are at risk, so at-risk groups who may not currently be part of the economy in the way we want them to be, perhaps it's a way to convert or to course correct and bring them to the economy in that direction so that they can also contribute in situations like that. So it's not just what I would call the elite groups who are university graduates who have the first bite of the cherry, but also those who whose things are locked in some way through other means or methods. I saw Anju had a hand up. Is it still up? Anju?
Yeah, so my name is Anju, and I work for the Pacific community. We work with the 22 Pacific Island countries in the Pacific, but particularly in the areas of climate change, agriculture, health. And what my sort of role is to bring in ICT or internet accessibility for these sectors, because these are some of the neglected sectors when it comes to talking about ICTs. But one thing I wanted to mention was, I know we're talking about a lot of challenges, like, for example, climate change, etc., but I think there are great opportunities, and there are also a lot of things happening in the Pacific. So, for example, Fiji was just part of the COP23 in Bonn, and they tabled a few things, and they were able to get funding to do work in the area of climate change, etc. But unfortunately, there was nothing sort of related to ICT or internet accessibility. But this comes back to the point about Pacific countries especially the ministers that are working in this area, should also be connecting to what's going on worldwide or internationally. And the other thing I wanted to mention was there's a lot of initiatives that are happening, and I think Jane mentioned one in Vanuatu, but based on the Vanuatu's universal access policy, There's a remote island. They're working on a computer-based laboratory and internet community center. So these are some of the things that are already happening. But I think the missing part is they still need a lot of support, because it just doesn't, it's just not just about implementing it, but ongoing support to actually, and I think this is when international partners need to be aware of and need to come in and sort of help with this. The other thing is with internet exchange. Fiji has just launched one, if I'm correct, yeah, Salah, Maureen? And Vanuatu has already launched it. But again, like I said, there's opportunities about learning from them, because there are good practices, like Bevil said, there are good practices happening in the Caribbean, and learning from them. And this is one thing that we are not really doing. And I know I shouldn't be mentioning, because I know this is related to accessibility and stuff, but in terms of other things that are happening, like for example, Tonga has a national cert program. And this was also funded by the Australian government and APNIC. So I think, again, these are some of the things that are happening in the Pacific. So there's quite a lot of things that are already happening, but I think one of the key challenges is that we need ongoing support, and sustainability is one of the key things that I want to highlight here. Once development organizations or donors come in, they implement or they push in funds for like a year or two, but what happens? Then the countries struggle, or the organizations in the Pacific struggle to sort of maintain and sustain these initiatives. That's all. Oh, and one more thing, in terms of Tanzania, the ACP countries, the Pacific community is working with the ACP Brussels, to work with Pacific media focal points in the region, but not only to look at issues pertaining to ICT, but generally everything and anything related to climate change, natural disasters and stuff. So we've been trying to do it, but it's just, I think we need ongoing support again. That's it.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome people who are behind us in the round table in the room. If you want to join us, come closer. And I do see there are at least two people who want to speak now. But beyond that, just what you could do is catch my eye or raise your hand if you want to respond to the question. So I have first Alan Greenberg, who wanted to respond.
Thank you. I didn't, Alan Greenberg. I didn't want to respond. I want to ask a question. Jane, in her intervention, asked the question, how is the multi-stakeholder model working for you? Something that's always struck me in very small economies is the interconnectedness of an organization, of the group. You mentioned the elite, the educated. There's a small group. People wear multiple hats. That implicitly becomes a multi-stakeholder model, even though we don't call it that. You know, if in part of your job you are an advisor to the minister, that should be an enabler to have things happen. Yet what I'm hearing is it isn't working. And I'm just curious, I would have thought that would make it much easier to make critical decisions, because you personally know and invite to your house all of the people who are involved in that decision in the extreme. And I'm curious why it doesn't seem to be working and helping advance some of these things. Thank you.
Well, we're not that small, but but I do see your point. I think from where I sit, I just want to respond to that. I think that there are many issues working. The politics within the small island states are not straightforward. So it's even if someone knows someone, as you allude to, it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily mean that I can call a minister if I did know the minister, and tomorrow something happens. The legislative framework, the wheels of process in an economy that is descended from colonial times and so on, and all of the resource challenges that fraught therein may not necessarily lead to what you want to happen. They're very good ideas, that are very willing and passionate people, even politicians, I dare say, who would like to have things happen. But the wheels of the economy and the wheels of the process, environment, institutional frameworks don't necessarily make it happen, and it's not something that, while we don't want to take a fatalistic view of it, we like to change it, but it's quite difficult. And having a minister for coffee or for drinks can't yet solve that. So I think that is something that we may want to correct in the future. There are a few rebuttals coming in. So Alan wants let Alan rebut here.
It's not a rebuttal, just a comment. I'm not particularly naive. But the communication channels I was referring to in another environment don't exist at all. And you would have to go through horrible things to even make contact. And so just the existence of a communication channel, I was wondering to what extent does it facilitate it? It doesn't make it magic. Yeah.
Just Bevil Wooding, just to respond, Alan, you're correct in that those channels are shorter in small societies and small environments. And to me, there's a plus and a minus to it. The plus is it is easy to get multiple stakeholders together into a room to have a conversation. The minus is that the risk of exposing yourself on multiple fronts normally inhibits persons from making that outreach if they're not fully aware of what point of attack may follow their attempts to bridge divides. In English, basically, the same thing that allows us to easily hold meetings and get groups together is the same thing that allows somebody to be punished or to be ostracized or to be misinterpreted because they wear multiple hats and because they represent various interests. So that's how it plays itself out. I wanted to jump on a point Anu was making as well, which kind of links to it, using the St. Vincent regulator as an example of how education, multiple hats, and identified need can work together. The St. Vincent regulator actually recently took universal service funds to help introduce new courses into a community college dealing with cybersecurity. And then they turned and asked the newly formed Internet Society chapter to look at other areas where short courses can be introduced to young persons. And I thought that was a wonderful, practical example where they did not wait on external donor funds. They didn't wait on some external party to come in and tell them what could or should be done. They simply looked at the fact that young people weren't sufficiently engaged in the emerging internet economy, and they knew that it represented a potential form of income and participation, and they approached a community college over coffee. And in very short time, the course was introduced into the community college. Now they're looking for partnerships to add other courses to what is a successful pilot, using resources that were put there by the operators through the Universal Resource Fund. Now, interestingly, those same operators didn't want those funds to be used for establishing an exchange point. So it was a search to see, okay, we can't use them there. We have the funds. Can we use it over in another area where there is need? And they found something that everyone could agree on, which is education for the young people. And so that was a good example.
Thank you. So before Sal and Maureen, just want to see if there's any, going down the round square table, if there are any points down or in the back who wants to weigh in before anybody repeats, because there's some repeating points coming, repeating people speaking. Looking around. Not seeing any hands. Okay, so first Maureen and then Sala.
Thank you, Tracy. I have to agree with Bevil when he says that wearing multiple hats can be an advantage and a disadvantage. And I think that with my minister, for example, anything that I might have said with one hat that he didn't like actually just scrubbed everything else that I might have said that he might have liked. But I think one of the things I wanted to raise the Cook Islands at this particular stage because from up until now, the internet, which we are a country of 14,000, and we have a satellite that is dedicated to us, O3B satellite, mega sort of like bit capacity, but the government treats the internet as a luxury item, so that you can have the people who can afford it and those who can't. And in fact, the internet is actually quite unaffordable to a lot of people who, especially where the average earning income is 15,000 New Zealand, which is about 8 US. There's a really big gap between the people who actually use the internet, not for work, but actually in their homes as part of their daily lives. It doesn't happen. One of the really critical turning points for the Cook Islands is that they have not given people a chance to use the internet for all the reasons that we know that the internet can be used for. And yet, next year, the Cook Islands graduates. It no longer is a developing country. It is the first island nation in the Pacific to actually become a developed country. And that is because we have a very successful tourism industry. But the tourism industry, when the GDP is sort of like constructed, is divided, what the money we earn is divided by the small population. Of course, it looks as if we are very wealthy, but it doesn't take into account that there are the very wealthy and there are the very poor people who don't access the internet, and the government doesn't support or encourage the use of the internet for the training and the skills development of the local population. So we're actually sort of like going to be very disadvantaged as we move into this new era, and at the same time the government has been given a grant by the New Zealand government, and they'll get a loan from ADB to be connected to the cable in 2019. All very well, but there has been no move to improve the infrastructure. There is still no sort of like strong governance, interests, sort of like to make sure that, with this increased and enhanced resource, that we're actually going to make the best, it's going to have the best value for the people. So there are really important issues that the Cook Island government needs to be sorting out within the next month. As I mentioned, I'm on a telecommunication advisory council and representing civil society. But honestly, we have advised the minister on several instances on several issues. But I don't know who he listens to, because he doesn't listen to us. He goes off the island, comes back with a magnificent idea that's got nothing to do with what we said. So, but that's small island. We're a small village, and again, like what people say and what they, the conversations that they have may not mean anything when other people are also involved. But so there we stand. We'll be moving into another status, and we will not have access to developing country funds. So we have to look at, the internet's going to become more important. The internet's got to become an economic enabler for the people. But we're going to be starting from behind the mark, because, like a lot of our people have not had the contact, the training, and all the skills development that they will need in order for that to be successful. Thank you.
And I think that's another failure, apologies to all the economists in the room, a failure of economics and how things are calculated in terms of GDPs and the way economies are ranked. I know that's a sore point for many countries, where with commodities cycling between highs and lows and your GDP goes up and down, you move in and out of these slots and your funds dry up, and it's a very classic case of resources running out. And when you get put into that bucket, it's difficult to get back in the other bucket. And no one seems to understand the issues that these countries face are not necessarily only economic, dollars and cents, GDP, per capita issues. They're very real social environmental, structural, infrastructural issues that those figures can't even begin to address. And until they realize that, and I think the SIDS report that ISOC alluded to those issues, until those things emerge more and more, we're going to have challenges like this coming to the fore. Salah?
I'd just like to pick up on the comment by our colleague from Indonesia, who made remarks on competition, the impact of competition policies. And I think and it's not unique to the SIDS region, it's something that affects telecommunications globally. The impact of competition policies on access is a very real thing, and particularly even more so in small island developing states where things tend to be heavily politicized. What I should say, even the US is politicized with the FCC net neutrality, Alan. Anyway, he's Canadian, so he couldn't be bothered. Yes, small joke. Anyway, having said that, there's this balance in terms of you want to have robust competition policies, but also to ensure that it has to be light-handed. You don't want to have very heavy-handed regulation. And so even now when we're introducing things like, I shouldn't say when we're introducing, when you say internet governance in communities within SID states, there are many who are not necessarily integrated in the IGF processes, as Anju had mentioned. And they seem to think that the meaning of governance is to regulate, you know. So there's, and going back to what Jane said in terms of education and what Bevil underscored in terms of, again, education, I just thought I'd point to an IGF in Nairobi, where we we're following that meeting, we got Bevil to come to the Pacific, thanks to the US State Department who sponsored. And thanks to APNIC, we reached out to APNIC Director General Paul Wilson, who's sitting right at the back there. Yes, and we got Bevil and a few others to facilitate a youth tech camp. So we did internet governance policy training and also building and designing of mobile apps, which was led by Bevil. And at the same time, in a side meeting, thanks to APNIC who sponsored it, we got the CEOs of all the telcos in the region to come into Novotel to have an IXP executive briefing, which was the beginning of a conversation, because there were a few of us, you know, like at the middle level, who could push for IXPs to an extent, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's the executives and the board who make the call in the region. So that initiated the conversation and just the level of awareness. And Bevil was good at making it simpler and easy for you know, people to understand, apart from executives, like those that needed to understand, like the banks, like those who actually have content and where content actually drives market economics and that sort of thing. So I just thought I'd make that point. And the second thing is, I would like, as an outcome from this meeting, because it's in the transcripts, for the Internet Society, since Jane Coffin is here, maybe to have more studies and more reports done in terms of the competition aspects and the impact on access and availability, and to look at maybe at least 5 years worth of data. So that's a wish list. The other thing is, in the Pacific, even though we've started growing in terms of IXPs with PNG, Vanuatu, and Fiji, still more needs to be done. Like I said, the price cap that was placed by the regulator in Vanuatu 3 months ago, which got the regulator suspended, literally, I was told that the uptake on demand was just like this, instantaneous, and capacity was maxed out. So in terms of backhaul, obviously because it's expensive to buy backhaul because it's not liberalized, that was another issue. But just for the sake, since it's being transcribed, I thought I'd just highlight some challenges that were listed during a consultation, and these are some of it. We have segregated information infrastructure platforms, data integrity issues all across the Pacific, a lack of international and regional awareness and existence of information. In other words, we need the wish list to the SIDS community. We need a global SIDS repository where we can consolidate information that can be shared across SID states. And the other one is lack of cohesion leading to wastage of resources offloading data sets extraterritorially. And just to give an example of this, a lot of our metrology, as you know, SIDS states are prone to disasters. And so we've had issues with data sets gone missing. If you go to Vanuatu right now, the GIS, I went there for work 2 months ago, and I asked to pull some data sets, all gone. They have to start from scratch. But you won't see that published anywhere. And there's a lack of centralized regional virtual treaty depository. And currently in the Pacific, we don't have advanced modeling capabilities. And Anju knows even SPC has to use Melbourne University for their supercomputers. So back to you, Tracy.
Thank you. And we have just about 20 minutes left. So the final discussion question, and it's something that I think even Sala would want to weigh in on, given what we did on yesterday. So the SIDS continue to struggle with resource challenges in all forms: water, food, shelter, energy, quality of air. And many of these challenges have the potential to further drain the limited bandwidth, network resources, and human capacity available to public, private, and civil society actors in these territories. How then do we, as small, vulnerable economies, work together to meet and rise above this challenge, or risk quite literally being drowned in the digital revolution? So the question is, as small and developing states and as vulnerable economies, not just only, I guess, SIDS in this scenario, how can we all work together to develop one, and every meeting we talk about a research agenda or an action agenda, or even a SIDS alliance of some sort, to really get this moving beyond talking and beyond coming to the IGF and having a session and moving on. Is there a way that we can really make this real? How do we work together? And I'm looking for ideas not just from, you may have heard from everybody, it looks like there are 5 people in the SID, living in the SIDS, because it's Bevil, people's first names. But it's, you know, there are many more of us. There actually, I think, if I recall, there are about 55 million people living in just about 57 countries, just about 57 countries. So there are quite a lot of people there. But you may have heard, as an example, one island in Dominica, sorry, and it's Barbuda first, and then Dominica, almost completely devastated, wiped out. Well, completely. And Barbuda, people had to move out of the island completely. There's no one living there again, at least at this point in time. So what happens in situations like that, when immediately you are confronted with a disaster or with a challenge of that nature? Or in Montserrat, several years ago, where there was a volcano wiped out half the island, and people had to move to one side of the island and the others have to move out. How can we work together? So I'm looking to the people in the room, suggestions, ideas, working together as countries, as people, to solve these problems, and let's document it and let's get it going.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Joy Wathagi, and I'm from Kenya, and I'm an ISOC youth at IGF. And I think in such situations, we could probably come up with regional treaties that could address resettlement issues. So countries could probably decide that, if this country is affected by such a disaster, other countries should happily accommodate them, and it should be... And the signatories have to adhere to them. It should be like a binding treaty. That's my contribution.
Thank you. So I haven't heard a lot of people, so yes, say your name and...
Hello. My name is Rebecca Rektimbo. I'm from Tanzania. I'm an ISOC youth at IGF. When we're speaking about bandwidth and resources, I don't know about the islands, but for Tanzania, we have the Tanzania Internet Service Providers Association, and all the ISPs are members. So they have the internet exchange points. So far, we have one in Dar es Salaam, Arusha, and Dodoma, and they play a vital role in enabling to keep the traffic local. And another key thing that it helps with is I don't know to what extent they have involved content delivery networks, but the engagement of more than ISPs in this matter of the IX internet exchange points could be a vital role. I think he talked about that, and there's a need to look at that the internet exchange point should not only involve ISPs, but also involve content delivery networks and other key players. Another key thing is public-private partnership, the engagement of the government and the private sectors, that is individuals and organizations, could play a vital role to ensure that we have sustainability of the bandwidth and resources within these countries. That could be the same case for other developing countries, apart from islands. And then the issue of spectrum owners, that is like ISPs, being able to share the spectrum with other, that comes with a cost implication, though there could be a doubling of the capacity of cell towers and base stations so as to have broader bandwidth, increase in bandwidth. So I think there are a lot of critical factors that are involved, and they each have an important contribution to ensuring this. But I think we could start with public-private partnership, although I know for most countries there's a lot of politics involved, so that's a bit of a challenge. But if we could push for that and push for IXPs to involve more than just internet service providers, I think we're on our way to finding a solution to solve the issue of bandwidth and resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are two excellent points from the youth group. Do we have anything further from our guests in the room? Yes, seeing another one.
Hello everybody, I'm Karika and I'm from India, and I'm also a youth at IGF fellow. So yeah, I'm just taking your point, I'm extending your point as a matter of fact, and this is related to the bandwidth issue, like the fact that it's not just fiber that needs to be ensured, but also affordability, which has to be the primary concern. So with regard to this, in case of India, we have this policy which is called the corporate social responsibility policy, whereby each say ISP, in our case, so we have private players and we have to contribute to 2% of the profit for, say, social issues which are important. So if such a policy could be mandated for every ISP service provider, that 2% of the net profit, or say X% of the net profit, should be aimed primarily to increase access in those areas which where internet penetration has still not taken place, I think that could go a long way. Just a suggestion, but I'm not sure how feasible that is, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Karika. Anything else? Yeah.
One idea that I have, and it's not for us to do for you, but for you to do together. Many of the summits we've had, whether on community networks or internet exchange points, the participants have gotten together, all of you, and they formed a WhatsApp group. And then they formed a website group, a mail group, sorry. By working with each other and letting you all know what's going on, what one country's done, maybe it's Salah or Bevil, Tracy, the young woman who spoke from Tanzania, and thank you very much. Content delivery networks are very important. Many of them do want to provide services in your countries, and IXPs are a great place to host them. Back to the point, create a WhatsApp group of those of you that know each other and are interested, because you can constantly keep each other in touch. There's a group here on my mobile from a community network group in sub-Saharan Africa. I see their notes every day. Hey, there's a grant out. Did you all see it? Hey, you got the grant in Kenya. Awesome. And they're constantly supporting each other. That's community. You people are the future of connectivity in your countries, not me. I can tell you about other things going on, but you can do it. We've seen what Bevil's done, what Tracy's done, what Salah's done. Young woman here who's not talking much, Sintra, who's from Trinidad as well, but with the chapter, done tons of work and created workshops and more connectivity. So you guys get together and do it, or an email list, because that's where I've also seen APNIC, LACNIC's lists about IP resources. People help each other every day from ISPs solve problems on those lists. It's amazing. APC also has a great community. Mike knows is part of APC. He can tell you about that. So know that there are a lot of resources out there that you yourselves can contribute to and make a difference in. So go for it. You know, Tracy may be the head honcho here. You could lead the group and get a SIDS WhatsApp group together out of this meeting. So it's just a suggestion.
That's a good point, Jane. So I'd just like to mention that yesterday there was a SIDS preparatory session and day 0 that my colleague Sala quite expertly maneuvered through the MAG, the UN MAG system, and got us a session that replaced another session, and we had quite a number of heavy hitters there. And in that session, we proposed something of nature of a SIDS alliance, which would be, I think, the first step towards maybe what we're discussing there. We could start with a WhatsApp group, but it could also be a platform for moving forward. I will let Sala speak a little more on that in about a couple of minutes, but I think Bevil wanted to follow up strongly on what you were saying. So let's Bevil go first, and then probably I'll toss to Sala to give some more details on the SIDS alliance aspect.
Thanks, Tracy. Bevil Wooding. I just wanted to draw on the point Jane is making about how easy it is to start without permission and without formal bureaucratic or authoritative structures. After the last set of storms in the Caribbean, a number of persons got together, myself included, to look at what went wrong. Why did an entire country go offline after a hurricane? Hurricanes are annual events. These ought not to hit us by surprise. Why did the landlines go down, the radio communications go down, the mobile networks go down? And where were we not looking to be surprised by such a recurrent event? And what we decided to do in the end was to form amongst ourselves a commission to review Caribbean network resilience. We decided to do this because we knew that it would take the formal structures months to mobilize and to approve commissioners and so on. And so we just started to make some phone calls. We spoke to some of the internet organizations. We spoke to persons who we knew around the region and across the world who would be interested in analyzing the various aspects of what went wrong. And we made sure that the group not have any persons with an interest in excuse making. This is supposed to be an objective analysis of it. And to get to one of the points that was raised earlier, one of the things that we recognized, for example, when the networks went down, when the mobile networks went down, there were no agreements in place to deal with getting spectrum from another region or getting free roaming or roaming rates to be cancelled from one of the territories nearby that was within range, and you could have gotten back up and running quickly, but there was just no anticipation that such a scenario would be required. Ditto for ports waiving fees and all kinds of very practical issues around disaster recovery. And so the group was set up with a combination of interests, and this is public-private partnership at its finest, without the red tape. The Caribbean Telecommunications Union, the Caribbean Network Operators Group, ISOC, Packet Clearinghouse, ARIN, ICANN, all agreed to be part of the group. And then we made calls to Cisco and IBM, equipment vendors, meteorologists, climatologists, who could then help us also look into, and what do we need to do to make sure this never, ever, ever, ever happens again. And we came up with, the commission is only now being set up, and we expect to start in earnest in January. But we already identified the areas that we want to put a microscope upon. One is the autonomous networks. One of the things that happened is that there was a blind trust in the investment decisions of the service providers. People simply assumed that they had appropriate backup, they assumed that they had sufficient network resilience, and they assumed that they had sufficient response capability in place. All of these assumptions proved false. And so what we want to make sure is that we can now embark on a campaign for autonomous networks. Now, identifying it as important and then convincing others who don't have a history of setting up such networks, managing such networks, and reducing their dependency on the operators is a process that is going to take time. And so we recognize that. The second thing we realized was a campaign for local content, applications, and services. And this gets back into the whole issue of who writes your apps, who develops your software. some basic things like tracking where volunteers were going and who had which skills were not part of the available pool of resource in the aftermath of the storms. And we said, given the software talent, given the high levels of mobile usage in the region, why did we not have apps to deal with the migration, to deal with the displacement, to deal with the volunteerism, to deal with all of these things that we know kids could write in a weekend of activity? That must never, ever, ever happen again. And then the last one was local research. We had people doing flyovers to guess how many fields were damaged and how many ports and structures were affected by the storms. Where were the satellite maps? Where was the topography and GIS type applications to help us have a before and after picture? And again, the feeling is if we pool existing resource, that should never, ever, ever happen again. You all with me? The thing showed us in a very real way the practical benefit of working together and bringing people together in new partnerships. And one of the reasons why we feel that the Commission has to have both a combination of persons from the region and persons from outside the region is we also acknowledge the reality that local voices don't always get local respect. And so a big part of what we want to come out of the exercise are a set of trusted recommendations. So if you don't want to believe the person on the ground, believe the person who stood beside him who was not from the territory, who has credentials from large name companies that you respect or that you regard more highly than your own local talent. And so we're mixing all of that into a very practical approach to coming up with a review of Caribbean network resilience. I actually think that that model will apply in any territory, in any of our developing regions, as it relates to being prepared for events in a world where we expect more crises to come upon our territories. Thanks.
So we're running out of time, and I want Salta maybe to have the last point on the next steps. So I'm seeing, can I just do a quick take of so many points are left on the room? Because that'll be it. All right, so it's just one. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Brian. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian from South Africa. So I just want to comment on the challenges that can be faced, or most probably through natural disasters, and how we can contribute together, most probably from different countries. So I've been just thinking about it as our colleague here was just saying that we need research and we need volunteers, we need people to contribute. So what I've been thinking about is that most probably maybe we've been talking about the Pacific, the natural disasters, about destruction of buildings and infrastructure and whatsoever. So what I've been thinking is that I don't know whether it will be possible to create a website that is going to have the main key resources that one would need for survival after natural disasters. Most probably the key things to be looked at that website would be water, food, air, and energy. For example, after a disaster, one might also suggest that countries can also donate solar panels or harness energy from water waves so that you can at least get quick connection for the people to start reconnecting or communicating about the disasters. Also, this can help in volunteering. I've seen in natural disasters, people checking in on Facebook that I'm safe, this is happening. People can also further create donation, donation portals where people can put more money to help the locals in trying to bring back the community. I don't know whether is that possible to have a website that can have all the papers or all the necessary ideas that one can quickly utilize after a natural disaster.
Thank you, Brian. Excellent. That's an excellent point. I think Sala's going to pick it up, and she's also going to wind up the discussion with that SIDS Alliance point. So, Sala, your last word.
Thank you, Tracy. You've heard there have been mentions of a SIDS Alliance. Now, it's not something that was just birthed yesterday or last week or this year. This has been a discussion in the making that's been simmering for more than 3 years or 4 years, Tracy, when we first had the discussion. in an IGF like this. So one of the things I've been noticing is, you know how the Internet Governance Forum, you have the best practice forums, you have the dynamic coalitions, you have the intersessionals, and then you have workshop proposals coming up from the communities and from individuals. So one of the things I would really like to see personally is an increase or an avalanche, an increase in workshop proposals coming in from SIDS and developing states particularly. I like that Jane said, don't limit it to SIDS, extend to developing states. And that's certainly awesome, because you can only move forward, you know, collaborating and broadening the alliance. Having said that, yesterday we had a preparatory session, which was opened by the ambassador from the Fiji mission to permanent rep to the UN in Geneva. And she's the chief negotiator for COP23, and as you can imagine, Fiji was president of the COP23 this year. So she has experience in terms of pushing things and pushing things at that level. So we thought we should get a champion to champion our voices in that particular level, and at the same time the different levels. So we were also privileged, weren't we, Tracy, to have UNDESA present as well, because UNDESA, they look after, apart from the IGF project, they also look after the SDGs, and they're the ones who funded the UN Oceans Conference and that sort of thing. And quite aside from that, just underscoring what Jane mentioned, that at the end of the day it's the community, and Bevil said you don't need permission. And that's also something the Under-Secretary General of UNDESA said. You don't need permission to set up a global policy repository. Go ahead and start one. What's stopping you? And so here's the proposal. We have a SIDS, by the way, we have a SIDS booth for the first time in the history of 12 IGFs. It's currently empty. There are no brochures there, by the way. But and you know what? My job was just to book the booth. Your job is to go, man it, network, hang out, lime, bring your information. But what we lime, a Trinidadian word. But what I propose to do is we can have like a sheet of paper there, sign-up sheet, right? So even that extends beyond this, like those who want to sign up to the SIDS Alliance. And so obviously we'll be having coordinators for the SIDS Alliance, not myself because I'm on the MEG, I don't want to be conflicted. So I can push things better for you. Sorry, just kidding. That was a joke. You can delete that from the transcript. But seriously, as you can imagine, in the WTO, they had the 11th Ministerial Conference, and electronic commerce it was one of the new things on the agenda. And one of the things I've noticed that is common through the SID states is often the missions, the permanent missions, do not have the resources to proliferate and to take the ICT issues because it's not a priority compared to other things on the statecraft. So developing a SIDS position for both the CSTD, we don't have a SIDS representation and developing states representation on the CSTD. And so having a SIDS position from the SIDS Alliance, getting more members from the SIDS states on the MEG. So please apply to join the MEG when the call comes in. Workshop proposals, guys, feel free to matchmake across with each other, and think of ideas to propose workshops so that we can have a flood of new workshops coming in from the developing states. So our future is exciting. We don't let anyone tell us who we are. We know who we are. We're not limited by the size of our islands or the size of our countries and territories. We're certainly not limited by our gross national income per capita. Yes? We determine, and as Bernadette Lewis mentioned yesterday during the last session, she said, we determine and chart the pathways of our destiny. Yes? I mean, if South Korea could do it. In the 1960s, South Korea was poor like Zimbabwe. But if they could climb to become the top #1 in broadband in the world, and not only that, be the first member of the OECD, what's stopping the rest of us? Yes? So we're champions of change. So with that, if you are with us, Please sign up for the SIDS Alliance in developing states. You're not limited by experience, age. It doesn't matter if you're youth IGF or this is your first IGF. Everyone's an equal participant. Yes? So if you're up to it, please give your phone numbers and your email addresses. And with that, we thank Tracy Hackshaw for continuing to fly the flag, and Maureen Hilyard. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank all for coming. And just to close the 2017 Small and Developing States Roundtable, once again, thanks for coming, and have a great IGF. It's day one, so let's go.